Welcome back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 50. This week's episode was initially supposed to come out last week, but I think we can all agree that last Thursday was pretty heavy, and talking about things like van life and woodworking and my dogs all felt a little inconsequential compared to what we were all facing, the reality that I think we were coming to terms with. And so I decided to postpone it until this week, just so that I and you had time to process everything that is going on. And now that I've had some time, while it still feels a bit looming, as I'm sure it does for a lot of you as well, I think it's important that we kind of get back to our lives and get back to our routine and to doing the things that make us happy. I think connecting with one another and continuing to be vulnerable and building community is arguably now more important than ever. And so I wanted to celebrate episode 50. 50 episodes of the podcast is a huge milestone for me. And I wanted to take this as an opportunity to do something that I've been wanting to do for a while, but I've always shied away from it in one way or another. I think I've dipped my toes in, but I've never just fully given into it. And that is talking about something completely unrelated to my trauma. I think since I started posting on social media, I have been talking mainly about my experience with emotionally immature parents and behaviors associated with narcissism and the long-term effects of being raised by a narcissistic parent. And while these are all incredibly important topics to discuss, there's so much more to me than my trauma, and there's so much more to all of us than our trauma. But I think because the community that has been shown to me through social media since starting to share my experience on there have all sort of related to that one experience in my life, I think I have always found a way to convince myself that that is the only thing that this community will relate to. And that if I ever deviate from that, then no one will care. No one will want to hear what I have to say because they expect this one thing from me. And if I don't deliver that one thing, then I will in some way be a disappointment. And even just saying that out loud, I think it's so clear how reflective that is of so much of not only my life, but I'm sure so many of your lives. Growing up with an emotionally immature parent, you sort of feel like everything that you do is for someone else. It's rare, I think, to kind of take a moment and step back and ask yourself, what do I want to do? What am I interested in? What's important to me? Because I think so often the way that other people, mainly in our early lives, our parents, feel about us can be so much more important than the way that we feel about ourselves. And clearly, that's something that I'm still working on. But again, I thought that this would be a really great opportunity to kind of step outside of this box that I consistently put myself in, and to talk about different aspects of my life that are pretty unrelated to my trauma. And I think something that's important to mention is that being raised by an emotionally immature parent really does inform a lot of my personality and my identity and the way that I have lived my life and the different challenges that I've faced. And so even in talking about these different aspects of my life, these different experiences or perspectives, I think it'll always sort of make its way in. It'll always have some sort of an influence because of how much of a part of my life it was. And so that being said, I'd like to dive right into it. And I want to thank everyone who took the time to think of and submit a question for this week's episode. If I don't get to all of them, I will either post a short form video on Instagram or maybe do another episode like this sometime soon. But let's get into it. The first question: how do you work on dreams, career, etc.? We need a plan for how to do life. When I saw this question, it made me really happy because there is so much more to life than just mental health. Mental health plays a huge role in everything that we do, but it's just one aspect of our lives. And so I feel like this question kind of fit perfectly with the theme of this episode. And that's kind of why I wanted to start off with this question. So I think my dreams have evolved over the course of my life, which I think is very natural. I think it's normal for us to have different dreams throughout childhood and our teens and as we move into adulthood. I think our interests are different and we're exposed to new people and to new experiences. And I think a lot of those things can sort of dictate how we want to live our lives. But when I was younger, I think my dreams were a lot more traditional. I think I dreamt of living a life very similar to the life that I thought my parents lived. I wanted to grow up and get married and have kids and buy a house and get a job that I liked. And it all seemed very sort of straightforward. And as I've gotten older, I feel like the thing that I dream of the most is living a sustainable life. And that applies to mental health. That applies to physical health. I would love to be able to shop responsibly and to kind of do my part for myself, for the environment. I think in some ways my dreams have been simplified as I've gotten older because I do have a lot more perspective now than I did when I was younger. And I think it's much less about material things or these sort of objective surface level milestones, like things that you see people post about on Facebook. I think it's not so much about these individual moments as it is the way that you structure your life and the way that your daily routine makes you feel. I think if you're able to find yourself in a position where you wake up every day excited to do the things that you want to do and you're happy with yourself and the people that you surround yourself with, if you feel fulfilled, I feel like that is a dream come true for me. And I think it can be challenging to balance your dreams and the aspirations that you have and a career. I think whether we like it or not, money is important and we all need it to support ourselves. We need it to live somewhere. We need it to buy food. It's an inevitable part of life. And it can be so challenging to discover that work-life balance. I think, again, this is kind of one of those times when my experience throughout childhood bleeds into something like this, into my ability to develop and maintain a work-life balance with productionism and perfectionism and this need to achieve that so many of us feel. But I try to do things in life that will support me financially, that I also enjoy, that allows me to be creative, that allows me to be social and sort of tap into these different skills of mine. I think we all have different natural inclinations and abilities, things that are sort of underlying that if we foster can really flourish. And so that is all part of self-discovery, sort of allowing yourself time and space to discover what it is that you enjoy, what it is that you're good at. And if you can find a way to integrate that into your career, I think your career will be that much more fulfilling. A big change of mine that has sort of gone hand in hand with focusing more on mental health and understanding that rest is inherently productive is allowing myself downtime and really taking the steps to not feel guilty when I do allow myself to have downtime. For so much of my life, I think so much of my self-worth subconsciously was tied to productivity and to achievement, how much I got done and how well I did. That, I think, informed a lot of my personality and the way that I felt about myself. If I was making a really long checklist and checking off every box, it didn't matter if I skipped a meal. It didn't matter if I was only going to get 3 hours of sleep that night. I felt accomplished. And if the end result, whether it was studying for a test that I did well on or a project that I got a good grade on, if the end result of that was rewarding in any way, if it was a high score, if I got a compliment from a teacher, then for me, it felt like I was doing the right thing. And so I was encouraged to do more of that. And I failed to realize for a really long time the lack of balance in my life because I was pouring all of my time and energy into productivity, and that left very little space for my own personal interests and for personal development, which I've come to realize is just as, if not more important than the more productive side of things. And so as I've gotten older and I really started to focus more on my mental health, and I guess I've started to tie my self-worth much less to the things in my life that can objectively be considered to be productive. I think I've started to realize that I, as a person, inherently have value regardless of the things that I do or don't do. And that really sort of prompted a shift in my mindset when it comes to work and to dreams and aspirations and sort of this work-life balance that I think can be so difficult to achieve. I think it also allows me to view my life collectively as sort of this one big experience that's made up of lots and lots and lots of tiny experiences. And I think in the past, I had a much more zoomed in version of my life where I would look at things more on the day to day. And at the end of the day, did I get everything that I wanted to get done this morning done? Are all of the boxes checked off of my checklist? And I think it sort of felt like there was a finish line at the end of the day that I was racing towards. And personally, I think everyone will find a way to develop a work-life balance and to support themselves financially in their career while also finding time to pursue their dreams and their aspirations. But for me personally, I think it's really helpful to know that if I don't get everything done in a day that I had initially planned, all that's going to happen is that it's going to roll over into the next day. The world will not end. The sun will rise again tomorrow. And I think a big part of that for me has been opening myself up to change, which we've talked so much about change and how scary it can be for those of us who were raised in unhealthy environments. But the truth of the matter is that life is very unpredictable and it's fluid. And I think the better that we can be at navigating change and welcoming it into our lives, the more sustainable a life we can live. And that has been really important for me, being able to change my schedule, to rearrange plans, or to rework my to-do list. It's been really crucial. And I can say from experience, from someone who, when I was 16 years old, would spend 8 hours a day after coming home from school, sitting down at my dining room table, studying and doing homework, diversifying the ways that you spend your time, or at least for me, diversifying the ways that I have spent my time, has led to me living a much more fulfilling and a much more balanced life. I have not been burnt out in probably about 3 years. It's been 3 years since the last time I really, truly experienced burnout. And I think on a daily basis, I have a much greater capacity for handling stress and tension and change. And I think those used to be things that were very overwhelming for me. I think when you have a hard time embracing change, you can tend to be a bit more rigid in your approach to things and your schedule. And that, I think, overall can be really detrimental, not only to our mental health, but to our overall approach to life. And so, to summarize all of that, I would say do your best to figure out how you can live a balanced life and understand that your dreams and aspirations, your hobbies, and the things that you're passionate about are equally as important as your career, as the productive things that you do to support yourself financially. This is especially for everyone who's listening who was raised by an emotionally immature parent. I encourage you, do not tie your self-worth to your productivity. don't feel like you are less than for allowing yourself downtime. Because if you don't allow yourself time to rest and recuperate, you will burn out. And eventually your body will tell you, you need to take a break. And chances are, when that time comes, it'll be much more difficult to bounce back than if you were to just allow yourself work in some downtime into your daily schedule if you have a hard time with that. That is something that I have considered and something that I've done before, where if you allot 30 minutes or an hour a day to doing absolutely nothing, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's something that would have been really beneficial for me to hear about a decade ago. And lastly, gosh, I feel like I could do an entire episode on this one question alone. I want to encourage you to listen to yourself. And again, this all kind of comes with self-discovery and allowing ourselves to try new things. But if you find something that you're passionate about, that you believe yourself to be good at, that you want to dedicate time and energy to, don't let anything or anyone get in the way of that, or to scare you, or for someone to come along and encourage you to pick the safe route or to do the traditional thing, the thing that they did. I think so often when we approach someone with a unique idea, maybe something that doesn't make sense to them, it can be scary, and they can kind of by default encourage you to do the thing that they did. Oh, why don't you just go to college? Why don't you just take the safe job with a good salary and benefits? Yes, it can be very simple on the surface, but if that's not the way that you want to live your life, that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with you pursuing an alternative path. Which kind of brings me to the next question, which isn't so much a question as it is a suggestion. Woodworking, exclamation point. I can talk for days and days and days about my relationship with woodworking. But it only seems fitting to sort of go back to the beginning and what sparked my interest in woodworking in the first place. When I was 8 years old, my parents were renovating my grandparents' house. And I was as involved in the process as I was allowed to be, whether it was painting walls or cutting tile or just being in that environment, I think was so inspiring for me. That, I think, was when I discovered that I really enjoyed working with my hands, and I loved seeing something come from nothing. I loved the idea that you could create a home. You could bring something into the world that wasn't there before with your own mind and your own hands. And that stuck with me. That was a really formative experience for me. And as I got older, I developed an interest in design. I have always been a nature lover. I am in awe of the world that we live in. And when I was around 19 years old, I was in college. I was studying interior design because that was the closest major that I could find to something home, construction, design related, where I thought I might be able to apply these different skills and interests of mine. But I ended up not staying in college for too long. I dropped out after a semester to start actually building. I started small. I was drawing and painting on tables that I picked up off the side of the road or built with some scrap materials in my basement. After dropping out of college, I felt this sense of enlightenment. And I don't know any other way to describe it because that's exactly how I felt in the moment. I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling, waking up the day after I dropped out of college and the world around me going on as normal. Because for someone who grew up and for so long placed so much emphasis on school and academics and my performance in school, my relationships with teachers, to have made the decision to drop out of college and to go to my professors and say, I'm not going to be coming back tomorrow, I'm dropping out, and for the sun to come up and for people to still go to school and still go to work and for things to function the same, I felt so powerful, I think. It was a decision that I made for myself that was very much against the status quo and that was very out of character for me, at least to the people around me. I think in a lot of ways it felt very true to my nature because I always felt very determined and motivated and able. I think despite everything that was going on around me on a personal level, there was definitely sort of an underlying sense of security that I had within myself. I think I always knew that I would make it work, whatever it was. I was determined enough to make it work. And so I felt really sort of enlightened, like I could do anything, like everything sort of made sense after that decision for me. And as I started to dabble in woodworking and to learn, I became aware of just how beautiful these different things that we can create out of wood can be. And I fell in love with the process. I fell in love with the materials, the different kinds of wood that you can work with, and the different grain lines, the way that they look, the colors, all of that. It was like I was immersed in a new world. And I think as someone who has always loved nature and animals and has cared about the environment, I thought that there was no better way for me to sort of pay homage to nature than to make a living by showcasing its beauty and by creating furniture that will last for a lifetime, that will sort of not end up in a dump. I think we live in a time where things are made to be broken, to be replaced in 2, 3, 4, 5 years because of money, because of profits. And it felt amazing after sort of going against the grain and dropping out of college to do something like this also, and to fight against this consumer culture and to create something that is intentionally not disposable. I think in some ways it felt a little rebellious for me. I fell in love with the process and with the result. And that was always really important for me. I think going back to the first question, talking about dreams and career and aspirations and all of these things, I always wanted to combine my work and life. I never wanted to feel like I had to turn my personal life off to go to work, or to turn my work life off so that I could live my personal life. I always felt like it would make so much more sense to be able to integrate my life and my work. And that may not be the case for everyone. I know that it's not, but that just so happens to be how I feel and the way that I have chosen to live my life. And so to discover something that I was so passionate about, all the while it had sort of these secondary elements to it that were so much fun to explore. I remember one of the very first projects that I did, going to someone's house, and I should have still been in college. I was 19, maybe 20 years old. I was very young. And an adult, a homeowner, was speaking to me and asking for my opinion and taking the things that I had to say very seriously and genuinely considering my ideas and my suggestions. And that was so refreshing. And it was something that I hadn't experienced in real life before. And by in real life, I just mean outside of a classroom setting. I think I had always had a great relationship with teachers and I was a very mature student, but it didn't feel like real world experience. And so that was one of the things that fueled my desire to start not just a woodworking business, but a business of my own. And everything became very real when it comes to Path. Path Design is the name of my woodworking business. In 2019, when I met Brandon. Brandon was the first person who I talked to about Path, who immediately sort of saw it as a very real, tangible thing. Like, as a business, it was just as established as any other business. And I think it was so motivating and encouraging to be around someone who had so much belief in this idea and who was so willing to work on it with me. And so everything in terms of Path became much more real in 2019. And it has been the main focus of mine and Brandon's life since then. It's the way that we support ourselves, and we're lucky enough to do something that we both enjoy. I think it allows for a certain level of creativity It provides us with opportunity to learn how to do new things. And we find ourselves in these new and exciting environments, talking to all different kinds of people and creating things that make their homes, the spaces that they live in, not only more beautiful, hopefully, but more functional and more efficient. I love the idea of sort of fighting against this temporary sort of consumer culture that we live in. It's a lot of fun, and I feel like that has always been and always will be a driving force of Path, is creating things that will last, that you can pass down to generations within your family. Next up, we've got Vanlife. And I must say that the woodworking skills that Brandon and I have acquired over the last 5 years were instrumental in our van life experiences. We've done 3 cross-country road trips. And the first was back in 2019, about 6 months after we met in Brandon's Nissan Sentra, which I don't necessarily know if you can consider that van life. Outside of the actual van, we were doing all of the things that van lifers do. We just didn't have the vehicle. Next time around, we built a wooden truck camper for the back of our pickup truck. And the last time, we towed a travel trailer that we completely renovated. And actually, the renovation was featured in Dwell magazine. I will link that in the description to this week's episode if you're interested. Gosh, I don't even know where to start. I guess my inspiration for van life came not only from all of these super aesthetic photos and videos that I was seeing pop up on my Instagram feed back when I was 18, 19 years old, but there was a video by Jedediah Jenkins called Life Lessons from a 7,000-mile Bike Ride. And I don't know how this video crossed my path, but I watched it and I was so inspired by it. It really spoke to me. I think in the same way that I wanted to combine my work and my life, and I felt determined to sort of live my life on my own terms, this video sort of validated those feelings for me in a very real way. And he basically talked about how routine is the enemy of time. And routine is something that so many of us sort of fall into, and we may not even realize that we've been doing the same thing day in and day out until years have gone by. And he sort of argued that travel is one of the best ways to keep our brains awake, to break our routine, and ultimately to make the most of our time. And so after I saw that video, it was towards the end of 2018. The first thing that I said to everyone who I sort of rang in the new year with was, I'm taking a cross-country road trip this year. You can come, you don't have to come, but either way, I'm doing it. And sure enough, in 2019, in June of 2019, Brandon and I took our first ever cross-country road trip. And it was incredible. We covered 10,000 miles in just under a month. It was about 3 weeks, give or take a few days. We traveled the West Coast up Highway 1. We went up into Canada to Banff. And for 2 kids who had never gone away to school, who had never spent more than a few days away from family, and who had never really traveled beyond the East Coast, to see all of these different landscapes and to live in such a non-traditional way was so much fun. I remember so much of that trip, so many small little details, which confirmed the idea of that video. Everything sort of stood out, and I can still think back to memories that are so vibrant and so clear. But I think one of the other things that it showed me was that it doesn't necessarily matter your physical location. If you have problems in one place, you will have problems in another place. If you're happy somewhere, you'll be happy somewhere else. I realized that everyone, everywhere, is relatively similar. Everyone is waking up and going to work or going to school or committing some amount of time and energy to something. And they're having dinner and they're seeing their friends. They we're all sort of trying to figure it out, and it doesn't necessarily matter where we are. And I think personally, it was a decision that I made that ultimately, I think, allowed me to reclaim some of my own power in my own life, because it was a controversial decision, as I'm sure for those of you who have been listening to the podcast who know a bit about my story. As I'm sure you can imagine, it wasn't a decision that my parents wanted me to make, to travel without them and to go and see all of these amazing places without them. I decided to do it anyway because it was more important to me than making my parents happy. And so that kind of set a lot of different things in motion for me, I think, ideologically. And I felt new and alive and like my own person. Like no one knew me in these places. No one knew my parents or my history. I could do whatever I wanted and I could be whoever I wanted. And I realized that I didn't necessarily have to be in a new or different place to feel those things. And so coming back from that trip is when Brandon and I truly started Path. But we had that travel bug. We had that love for the road. And so 2 years later, we did it again. We had a bit more space that time around. We had adopted Brooklyn at that time, so it was 3 of us instead of just 2, which changed things logistically for sure. But overall, it was relatively similar. I think a lot of what you see on the internet when it comes to van life is sort of a glorified version of what you actually experience. There are a lot of stops in gas stations and rest areas. If you want to shower, if you don't have running water in a fully sort of decked out van, you might be showering at Planet Fitnesses. Baby wipes are essential. I will leave it at that for now. You're cooking. We cooked on the side of the road most of the time, outside on public land in campsites. We slept in a lot of Walmart parking lots. And there are times when you find yourself between spots and you need to sleep and you have to find a small little residential road and hope that you don't get the knock or hope that you don't get caught in the middle of the night. And so there are a lot of things to figure out logistically, but we both feel that it's entirely worth it to have that kind of experience and to immerse yourself in nature and to allow yourself to be uncomfortable and to go without the conveniences of normal day-to-day life. There is so much to get into when it comes to van life, not only ideologically, but logistically, the things that we pack, the way that we plan out our routes and where we stay. And so if this is something that you would like for me to talk more about, I can do an entire episode on van life and more of the specifics. Next question. What drives you in life? I think I've always, at least as an adult, okay, this is something that I have taken that I think has developed as a result of something that my parent used to do a lot throughout my childhood. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this also. If I was ever upset about something or didn't want to do something or was in a bad mood or got hurt, I think the comparisons were always very extreme. My parent would always sort of point out how so many people had it so much worse than I did. And I think sometimes the intensity of these comparisons, comparing me to someone who maybe has a terminal illness or someone who doesn't have food or a house to live in, I think in the moment it minimized my problems, obviously, and didn't really allow me the time or the space to process my emotions. But as an adult, I think the silver lining that I have taken from those experiences throughout my childhood is this intense gratitude for being alive and for being healthy and for being happy. I think what drives me in life is being alive and understanding how much of a gift that is, to be able to get up and to have ideas and to pursue your passions and to bring these ideas to life and to call a friend or to play with your dog or to paint anything. I think when you look at all of the things that we are able to do simply by being alive, there's so much to be grateful for. And I know that that can sound a little bit extreme, and that is not at all to discount any of the very real emotions or traumatic experiences that so many of us go through. I think something that I have learned as I've started to heal and I've learned more about mental health is just how important and necessary it is to recognize and to validate all of our different emotions. And there are times when I feel completely overwhelmed and depressed or anxious, like nothing can make anything better right now because I'm angry or I'm frustrated or whatever it might be. Everyone has those moments, and that's okay. But I think when I think about what drives me in life, it's understanding that we all have a finite amount of time in this life, in this experience that we're all sharing. And so sometimes when I think about whether or not I want to do something, should I go out for a run today? Should I go out and play with my dogs because I have a lot of other things that I need to get done? I sort of find myself thinking about a time in my life when I'm much, much older, and maybe I can't get up and run, or maybe my dogs aren't here anymore. And I think about, what would I trade to be in this position again that I'm in right now? And I think more often than not, that gives me the motivation that I need to go ahead and actually do those things. That can sometimes be so easy to just let slide by and next time, I'm not going to do that now, I'll do that tomorrow, to just put off. And so I would say being alive drives me, and the desire to make the most of my time and my relationships and the things that I have in my life to make the best of it all. I think on top of that, there is definitely an element of wanting to be a good person and wanting to be a positive influence in the lives of the people that I care about. And so taking an interest in their interests and being there for them when they need me, these are all things that really sort of feed my soul, I guess, not to sound too cheesy, but I think there are very few things that are more real in life than the experiences that we have and the people that we share them with. And even though they may not be the most tangible things, I think those are the things that more often than not are the most impactful. And so those are the things that drive me in life. All right, and now we've got a few shorter ones. Less philosophical, but equally as interesting, I would say. What's your favorite sport to watch and favorite sport to play? I would probably say that my favorite sport to watch is either baseball or football. I think I grew up playing baseball and softball, and so I think I have the deepest understanding of baseball as a game. And so I think for that reason, it's really interesting to watch. I think there's also such an energy when you watch football, and the time of year. There's something really special for me anyway about fall. And I remember, playing football in the fall as a kid and then coming in and, my cheeks would be so red and my nose would be cold. And my grandma would make this incredible tomato soup. And there were days where I would come in from playing outside in the fall and the tomato soup would be there. And I think I just have a lot of fond, not necessarily specific memories, but feelings that are associated with this time of year and watching football on a Sunday afternoon, sort of in comfy clothes under a blanket sort of thing. And so I think for that reason, I enjoy watching football, but baseball I definitely follow the most. I understand it the most, and so that's always really fun to watch. But I will say that when the Olympics roll around, it's a completely different ball game because I feel like there's so many sports that are available to watch. I love watching track. I love watching swimming. I love watching gymnastics. I feel like as someone who was an athlete growing up, I just love watching people compete and watching athletes, people who have dedicated so much of their lives to really honing and fine-tuning their skills at this one particular sport, I think it's so impressive and satisfying to watch. But personally, I love to play softball. I love to play baseball. I like playing basketball. I wouldn't say I'm as good at basketball as I am softball, but I also really love gymnastics. And that's something that I have been trying to find a way to get back into as an adult, which as a 27-year-old feels it doesn't feel strange to me personally to want to do that, but I feel like finding adult gymnastics classes is a little bit more difficult than finding gymnastics classes for kids. And so I've been trying to find a way to work that back into my life because I started gymnastics when I was 8 years old. And again, for anyone who has been listening to the podcast for a while, that time in my life is sort of what I think about when I think about a version of me that is the most similar to who I am now. I think 7, 8-year-old me was the most independent and the most confident that I would be probably for the next 10 years after that. And so gymnastics definitely sort of marks that time in my life for me. It's one of the things that does. And it was a great way for me to be physically active. And I would love to find a way to incorporate that back into my life now. I think this is sort of a side note, but one of the things that I think can be challenging for a lot of us is how active our minds can be. This is something that I have definitely dealt with that has been a challenge for me. Mind racing and intrusive thoughts and perfectionism, productionism, hypervigilance, all of these different things sort of balled into one. I think it can sometimes drain your energy mentally. And something that I have found that playing sports or being physically active in any way does for me is it sort of forces me to focus on the task at hand, on what's right in front of me, because I'm physically exerting myself. And so my attention and focus is on the ways that I'm moving my body and the things that I need to be paying attention to play this sport or to move my body in a way that's safe if I'm flipping or doing anything like that. And so I think in a lot of ways, physical activity can be very similar to journaling for me, where it allows me to kind of quiet that voice inside my head, to slow my thoughts down. And so, yeah, I think sports in general can be a really great outlet. All right, next one. Most painful tattoo, least painful. That's a great question. I haven't spoken very much or at all about my tattoos, but I would love to. I might do a full tattoo tour if that's something that you might be interested in. I've got about a dozen tattoos, give or take, and the most painful, I would say, was actually inspired by my first cross-country road trip and that video, Life Lessons from a 7,000-mile bike ride. On the inside of my arm here, I have a bicycle with a couple of different scenes in each of the tires. And that was definitely the most painful tattoo that I have gotten. I think just because of how close to my armpit it was, and it's the inside of my arm, so the skin is a little bit more sensitive, and it was really detailed, so it took about 3.5 hours to do. And my least painful tattoo, I would say, was maybe the butterfly on my leg. That's another one of my favorites, but tattoos for me haven't been, granted, I've only probably sat for about 3.5 hours because I haven't gotten any massive tattoos done. But tattoos for me have always sort of been a meditative experience. I feel like I've always enjoyed the process of getting them. And so it's never been unbearable for me. All right, next. And I think I'm going to be wrapping it up with this one. I think I've already talked for a little too long, but we'll wrap it up with, your style is so cool. How would you describe your taste in clothes? So I've had a really interesting relationship with clothes throughout my life. When I was really young, again, going back to like this 7, 8-year-old time in my life, I was extremely girly in the way that I dressed. Pink was my favorite color. My room was painted pink. My bedding was pink. I wrote a poem in kindergarten about how pink was my best friend. And I loved wearing skirts. I loved wearing girly clothes and dressing up. And I always thought that it was so much fun. And then in third grade, my school district announced that they were going to be introducing uniforms, a uniform policy, which consisted, at least in the early years, of a navy blue golf shirt and khakis. And this is actually something that I would really like to talk more in depth about, the effect of uniforms on children and their own personal development. Because I remember in second grade, I had a handful of friends who we would sometimes coordinate the things that we would wear, and we would wear different colored tights, and it was so much fun. And I feel like the way that you dress really does inform a bit the way that you feel about yourself, and it allows you to express bits of your personality that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise. And so when the uniform policy kicked in, 3 days a week, I was wearing khaki pants and a navy blue golf shirt. And the other 2 days, on gym days, I was wearing navy blue basketball shorts and a tan t-shirt, just a tan unisex t-shirt. And it was incredibly bland and boring, and everyone looked the same. And that was around the time that I started playing sports a little bit more competitively. I was playing basketball and I was playing softball not long after that. And it became very convenient for me with practices and whatnot to just dress more like a boy. As I was getting older, I didn't know how to express myself through clothes as much anymore because I was being told what to wear 5 days out of the week. And so I feel like I didn't really have much of a style, probably from fourth grade until after I graduated high school. And going to college, when I was able to dress in whatever clothes that I wanted, it very much felt like an experimental time for me because I was trying things for the first time, or I was trying things that I hadn't tried in a really long time. And I think I was always sort of erring on the side of caution and maybe just wearing what everyone else was wearing or wearing things that were sort of simple. I hadn't developed my sense of self yet, and so I certainly hadn't developed my sense of style, but it's something that has been evolving, I would say, over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, and in large part due to not only self-discovery and healing and getting to know myself, but because of Brandon. Brandon is extremely creative, and he thinks outside the box. And he encourages me to try new things and to be myself. And I think being around someone like that and existing in this kind of environment, I feel very free to sort of try things and to experiment and to wear something that in the past I know my parent would have made a comment about, knowing that I'm in a safe enough space to try these things and to see if I like them or not has been really beneficial in me getting to know what my sense of style is. And so I would say right now, I don't know if I can define my style in any one particular way. I think I like for clothes to be comfortable and functional and cool. I think I like for my clothes to make me feel good. I think there are times when I put on an outfit, I put an outfit together and I'm just like, yeah, this is me. And I don't necessarily know what defines that just yet. I don't know if I ever will. But something else that I'm moving towards, going back to this first question, living a sustainable life, is finding clothes that are sustainable, that are ethically produced, that will last me for a long time, that don't have any sort of microplastics in them that might absorb into my skin. And so my experience and relationship with clothes is sort of an ongoing journey, I would say. But that is also something that I would love to share a bit more about. I had a lot of fun talking about all of this week, and I hope that you did too. I hope you enjoyed listening to this and getting to know me a bit more, because there is so much more to me than my childhood, and so much more to me than the ways that my parents' unhealthy behavior shaped me as an adult. And I understand how important it is to talk about these things. And it's not something that I'm going to stop talking about, but I think it's something that I want to talk about in addition to other things. Because personally, I think I've come to a point in my life where I feel like I've done a lot of the work and a lot of the healing. And it's not something that I think I'll ever be done with, because I'm always going to be faced with new experiences and challenges in my life that bring to the surface something that I haven't thought about, or a memory that I have suppressed that now I have to process. But it's really important for me to start to feed these other sides of me and to sort of bring them back into focus. I think learning so much about emotional immaturity and narcissism and mental health, it was sort of like an explosion of knowledge and information that I was absorbing this time last year. And that was the focus of my life. And it has been for the past year. And it's been so beneficial to my understanding of my relationship with my parents and with myself and the people around me, the way that I approach work and rest and all of these different things. But I'm afraid that if I focus on it too much, then that will define me. And I don't want that alone to define me. And so this, I think, is the start, finally, of me pushing myself to start to share my stories, plural, not just my story with trauma, my story throughout childhood, because I have a lot of stories about a lot of different things. And I think I have to let go of the fear that the community that has shown themselves to me, that has been so kind and supportive, will disappear if and when I do that. I have to let go of that fear, because I know at this time in my life that this is the right decision to make for me. I'm ready to kind of learn new things and to talk about new things and different parts of my life. And so I have to let go of any sort of expectation or fear that I might have going into this, which is clearly easier said than done. It's taken me 50 episodes to get here, and I haven't posted on Instagram for the last week and a half or so because I've had ideas, but I've been so hesitant to actually execute them that I haven't done anything. And so I'm really going to do my best to change that, and I appreciate you all for sticking with me through this. So cheers to episode 50. I'm super happy to be here and very proud of how far we've all come. And I will be back next week with another episode of It's Not Normal, the podcast.